4 years ago, when I was 24, my mum passed away from breast cancer. Losing her was heartbreaking, but it wasn't a surprise. We'd known it was coming. What hit me harder was realizing both my grandmothers had also died from the same disease. That's when it really sunk in. This could be my future too. I booked a screening with a specialist to get checked out. The news wasn't good. They found abnormal cells in one of my breasts, and those cells could turn cancerous at any time. Given my family history, the doctor said the risk was very high. I had a choice to make, and none of the options were easy. Option 1 was regular screenings every few months, basically waiting to see if the cells turned into cancer. It could happen soon, or it might never happen. But the thought of living with that kind of uncertainty was unbearable. Option 2 was a single mastectomy, removing the breast with the risky cells. It would reduce the chances, but the other breast would still need to be monitored closely, and I'd face the same anxiety. Option 3 was the most drastic, a bilateral mastectomy, removing all my breast tissue and cutting the risk down to almost zero. I chose the bilateral mastectomy. After seeing what cancer did to my mum and grandmothers, I didn't want to take any chances. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. The surgery went as planned, but the scars it left behind were nothing like I'd been prepared for. They weren't small or subtle, they were huge, raised, jagged, and bright pink. Every time I looked at them, I felt like I'd lost more than just my breasts. I stopped leaving the house. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror without feeling disgusted. I threw out every mirror I owned and avoided seeing my reflection anywhere. Eventually, I started therapy. I told my therapist how much the scars affected me, and they suggested I see a plastic surgeon. It wasn't their usual advice, but they could see how much I was struggling. The surgeon recommended a few options: creams, laser treatments, or implants. The creams didn't work, and the laser treatments were too risky and expensive. That left implants. I went ahead with the implants, choosing a slightly smaller size than my natural F cup. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. The scars were hidden, and I could wear clothes that made me feel confident. Looking in the mirror no longer made me cry. It's not that appearance is everything, but the scars had been a constant reminder of what I'd gone through, and I couldn't live like that. At 28, I finally felt like I was in a good place. I had a decent job, good friends, and a sense of normalcy again. But that all changed when Jill, a coworker, overheard something about my implants. She didn't know the full story, but that didn't stop her from turning my life into office gossip. The trouble started when an old friend and I were planning a holiday. We were talking about flights and how things have changed since we last traveled together. My friend made a joke about me going through airport security with implants, and Jill, a coworker, overheard. By the end of the day, everyone in the office knew I'd had a boob job, but nobody knew why. At first, I tried to brush it off, hoping the gossip would die down. But Jill wasn't done. Over the next few months, she made snide comments and jokes about my chest, always just loud enough for me to hear. Once, she said I had more plastic than Barbie. Another time, she called me fake in 2 ways. A coworker later told me Jill had referred to me as a sack of silicone behind my back. I didn't know why she had a problem with me, but one comment gave me a clue. Jill mentioned the NHS, so I figured she thought I'd gotten my implants on taxpayer money. She wasn't completely wrong. I had my mastectomy through the NHS, but the implants were paid for privately. Still, it was none of her business. I asked her to stop. I spoke to her privately a few times, in places like the lift or the women's bathroom, where it was just the two of us. Each time, I told her her comments were hurtful and asked her not to make them anymore. She always shrugged it off or gave a half-hearted apology, but the remarks kept coming. It wasn't constant, but it was frequent enough to wear me down, at least 3 times a week for 3 months. I started dreading going to work, knowing I'd hear something demeaning. The breaking point came during lunch one day. A few of us, including Jill, were sitting together. I said something was shallow in passing, and Jill immediately shot back, "You'd know all about being shallow," gesturing at my chest. I lost it. "Do you know why I have these?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. A few years ago, doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had to get a mastectomy, which left me with huge, ugly scars. I went to a therapist who recommended a plastic surgeon, and they suggested implants to cover the scars. I did it so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for getting cosmetic surgery, you should ask why they did it first. I picked up my food and walked out, leaving her and the rest of the table in stunned silence. For the rest of the day, reactions were mixed. About a third of the office came up to me to offer support. They told me I was brave for speaking up and that Jill's behavior was out of line. But others defended Jill, saying she was just joking and that I had overreacted. I wasn't having it. Jill was being a bitch long before I told one of them. Later, I got an email from HR asking me to attend a meeting the next day to discuss a hostile work environment. When I called for clarification, the person on the other end used the term again. It sounded serious, even though I knew the term didn't hold much weight in the UK. I suspected Jill had reported me, and I knew I needed to prepare. I knew going into the HR meeting that I needed to defend myself. Jill had been harassing me for months, and if she was the one filing a complaint, I wasn't going to let her flip the narrative. I spent the evening preparing. I remembered something in my employment contract about requesting an impartial reviewer for complaints. I found the section, highlighted it, and made a copy. Then, I reached out to co-workers who had supported me earlier. I explained the situation and asked if they'd be willing to write statements about what they'd witnessed, Jill's comments, insults, and behavior. Not everyone wanted to get involved, fearing Jill's connections with HR and management, but 16 people stepped up. By the next morning, I had a folder with their signed statements. Each one detailed specific incidents where Jill had insulted me or made inappropriate remarks, complete with approximate dates and times. Some even included other examples of Jill targeting coworkers, like comments about someone's weight or an anti-Semitic remark about another person's nose. I also wrote down my own timeline, when I'd asked Jill to stop, what she'd said, and details about the lunchroom incident. When I arrived at work, I collected the final few letters from coworkers and went straight to the HR meeting. As expected, Debbie, one of Jill's friends, was leading the process. She stood up to guide me into the meeting room, but I didn't follow. Instead, I turned to another HR representative and said, "Am I meeting with you?" Debbie, clearly irritated, replied, "No, you're with me." I calmly said, "I'd like to invoke my right to an impartial overseer. My contract allows this if I believe the reviewer is biased." I held up the highlighted section of my contract. Debbie looked furious but couldn't argue. She stomped off to get the supervisor. When the supervisor arrived, I explained my concerns. I told him that Jill, the complainant, was a close friend of Debbie's, which made me uncomfortable. Debbie insisted she could be impartial, but the supervisor decided to involve a second HR rep to ensure fairness. We finally sat down, and the questioning began. They started by asking why I thought Jill had reported me. I explained that Jill had been making comments about me for months. They asked why I hadn't come to HR sooner. I told them I hadn't reported her because I didn't have an issue with her personally, I just wanted her to stop the harassment. When they asked about the comments Jill had made, I provided examples, backed up by the signed statements from coworkers. I handed over the folder, explaining that it included detailed accounts from people who had directly heard Jill's remarks. Some of those remarks included calling me fake in 2 ways and a sack of silicone. Then they asked about the lunchroom incident. I admitted that I could have handled it better, but explained that Jill's comment about me being shallow was the last straw. I detailed what I'd said in response, adding that the conversation likely had been captured on the lunchroom cameras. I also provided the names of everyone who was present. When they asked if Jill had known about my cancer history before this, I said no. "It's not something I feel I need to share with coworkers to avoid being harassed," I told them. The interview lasted over half an hour, with them rephrasing questions and digging into the details. By the end, the supervisor stood up, shook my hand, and said they would review the evidence. I returned to my desk, anxious but confident I had done everything I could. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. One by one, the co-workers who had written statements were called into HR. They were gone for about 10 minutes each, then returned to their desks. Finally, Jill was called in. She was gone for half an hour and came back visibly angry. Later, she was called back into HR, and when she returned, she started packing up her desk. She glared at me the entire time, muttering to anyone who would listen that I'd gotten her fired. She shoved her way into the lift and left. Around 5 p.m., I received an email from HR saying my case was closed. I could finally breathe again. Jill's departure left the office buzzing for days. Some coworkers avoided the topic, while others approached me to share their thoughts. A few said they were glad she was gone, mentioning how her behavior had made the workplace uncomfortable for more than just me. Others, who had sided with her before, were suddenly quiet. For me, it was a mix of relief and exhaustion. I hadn't wanted things to escalate this far, but after months of enduring her comments, I knew I'd done the right thing by standing up for myself. Jill's harassment wasn't just about my implants. It was about a culture of disrespect that she had fostered and others had tolerated. After the dust settled, the HR team sent out a company-wide email addressing the situation. They didn't name names but emphasized the importance of a respectful workplace. They also outlined a clearer process for reporting harassment and encouraged employees to speak up if they experienced or witnessed inappropriate behavior. I still felt a little uneasy walking into the office some days, knowing some people might see me as the troublemaker. But overall, things improved. My supporters were still there, and the workplace felt lighter without Jill's constant negativity. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled the situation. I learned that standing up for yourself is hard, especially when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. But it's worth it. No one deserves to be bullied or belittled, no matter the circumstances. If you're ever in a situation like mine, know this: you have the right to advocate for yourself. Document everything, build your case, and don't let anyone make you feel small. Most importantly, remember that your worth isn't defined by others' opinions, or by scars, surgeries, or anything else beyond your control. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments or subscribing to my channel for more real-life experiences like this. Thank you for reading.